Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're doing something a little bit different, and we're doing NXT comparisons. Now the way this is gonna work is gonna kind of work sort of like how like an NBA draft will work, or maybe an NFL draft or something, where we're gonna wrestlers gonna pop up on screen. We've already kind of predetermined a peak and a low for them, see kind of about where they're gonna be or should be or could be. Yeah, we're gonna kind of compare them to main roster talent, to Hall of Famers even, and we're gonna kind of go through everybody and give everyone a specific comparison. Like I said, it's gonna kind of work like the NBA draft and whatnot. But if you like this style of video and if you like this content, then give it a thumbs up and I'll let us know to do more like this.
Yeah, and we're gonna be kicking things off with Ariana Grace. Now, for her floor, we have her floor as Jillian Hall, and her peak is Chelsea Green. Now, for Jillian Hall, the reason why we gave her that description was basically because she could just be that comedy character who might not do anything, but she'll have maybe some funny TV moments, but might just never accomplish too much.
Yeah, and you know, obviously for her peak, as somebody who, at least for me, I'm not super high on. Not that she's like terrible in ring or anything like that, of course, but just somebody whose character we're not fully behind. Obviously a gimmick change could kind of change the whole direction of her career, but in her current gimmick, this is kind of where we see her.
Yeah. And next up we have Brooks Jensen. Now for his floor, we have it as Spike Dudley, and his peak we have Hardcore Holly. Would you like to say why we have Spike Dudley?
Yeah, Spike Dudley, some people may see that as like a slight to him or something like that maybe, but it's really not at all. The reason why we kind of gave Spike is because he's somebody who could make like a big guy look good, take a lot of bumps, like a hardcore-ish guy who could kind of go through the tables, the ladders, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's kind of why we gave that.
Yeah, for Hardcore Holly, the main reasoning was he could just be a guy who kind of flounders around the mid-card and is a kind of a trustworthy guy who might win a few, like an Intercontinental or a U.S. champion. However, probably won't ever win the big one. But yeah. Next up, we have Charlie Dempsey. Now for him, he has a pretty high ceiling, but his floor is Tony Nese, and his peak is Daniel Bryan. Now for Daniel Bryan, I know that might sound crazy. However, Charlie Dempsey is a phenomenal technical wrestler, like Daniel Bryan, maybe not as good as him, but with, you know, a few years under his belt and a lot of reps on TV and stuff like that, he could get to that Daniel Bryan like level. And as for Tony Nese, he could just be a good wrestler who might not make it far because of, you know, how technical he is.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely somebody who I hope gets a big storyline coming soon, because he does have a lot of talent that I feel like we haven't seen yet.
Yeah. Next up, Chase U. Now for their floor, we have their floor as Spirit Squad, and for their peak is New Day. And why is that?
Yeah, and Spirit Squad is kind of almost the same reason why we gave a few other people, and it's just because it's kind of like a comedy act, sort of like how we said with Ariana Grace and Jillian Hall, like a comedy act who maybe don't see a whole lot of success, maybe like a tag team title or something like that, but that's about it. And as far as New Day, obviously New Day is extremely successful, some of people's favorites faction of all time in some cases, and some big moments such as Kofi Mania and whatnot, so that's a pretty high ceiling to give them, but I definitely could also see that happening with Thea Hale and Duke Hudson in particular.
Yeah. Next up, we have Cora Jade. Now for her floor, we gave her Ruby Soho, and her peak is AJ Lee. Now for Ruby Soho, she could be that person where she is consistently has the talent to be a potential world champion, however might never get there. And yeah, that's kind of how Ruby was, and with Cora Jade, she might have to go somewhere else to maybe make it bigger, or she might have to come back similar to other people have done in the past, and yeah.
Yeah, and we gave her AJ Lee, obviously, because someone who she looks up to. She even calls CM Punk like a dad or like an uncle, whatever she calls him. Her wrestling dad is what she calls him. So yeah, so she really looks up to AJ Lee. I'm sure they've probably trained together at some point or something like that, I'm sure. So yeah, that's kind of why we gave that comparison.
Next up, we have Axiom and Nathan Frazier. Now, we are putting them as a tag team. Obviously, they could split at any moment, but for their comparisons, we gave them a floor of Private Party and the peak of the Hooligans. Now, for Private Party, we gave them this because they could just be a funny, goofy tag team who are consistently good and might not get to that world title. They might get close and they might even eventually win one, but for what we see right now, they might not get there.
Yeah, and Hooligans, for me, that's a big rating, I guess you could say, because that's one of my favorite tag teams of all time from, that era. They're one of the best tag teams from that era, so I feel like that was a good comparison in-ring wise and just character-wise as well.
Yep. Next up, the new NXT champion, and that is Ethan Page. We gave him the floor of Andrade and the peak of LA Knight. Now, for LA Knight, we gave him that peak because he has the charisma. He's pretty solid in the ring as well, so that obviously adds points. And he could get really over with the crowd and just become a fan favorite.
Yeah, nothing really much to add to that. That was why we gave him LA Knight. A lot of people will probably make that exact same comparison. But yeah.
Yeah, and then Andrade, we kind of gave him that because, again, similar to a lot of people, he's good enough to be a top talent. However, could get almost not buried in the roster, but might not see the light that some other people with maybe less talent or less, charisma, whatever it may be, success they get.
Yeah, that's a lot of success in NXT, such as Andrade, but when you leave there, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Next up, we have Fallon Henley. Now, for her floor, we give her Xia Li and the peak of Carmella.
Yeah, Carmella is a Money in the Bank winner. She is a world champion. Xia Li, obviously not the peak that you want to hear, maybe. But at the same time, she's still young, still kind of freshly getting seen on TV regularly. So she has a lot of time to build that floor as well as her peak.
Yep. Next up, we have Gigi Dolin. Now, for her floor, we gave her Sarah Logan and the peak of Toni Storm. Now, why do we give her Toni Storm?
We gave her Toni Storm because that's like, we're going to give her WWE Toni Storm, mm-hmm. Not the AEW Timeless Toni Storm. We're having her WWE Toni Storm as in somebody who is really good in ring, maybe has success in NXT, but once you get called up, you don't have that success, and maybe it'll take going to a new company to kind of see the vision in a new character for you.
Yeah, and Sarah Logan is just somebody who I kind of like a lot of women, which is unfortunate. They're kind of like a certain pool of people that they like to use for the world champions, and unfortunately, Sarah Logan was never one of those people to make into that pool, and I could see somebody like Gigi Dolin, unfortunately, not making it into that group. Next up, let's keep it with a former teammate, and that is JC Jane. We give her the floor of Sonya Deville and the peak of Michelle McCool. And why do we do that?
Yeah, obviously, that's just kind of where she is right now. She's not necessarily a megastar. She's not necessarily a low card, just somebody who no one pays attention to. There is people who really like her. Her entrance, surprisingly, was one of the best themes, like ranked-wise, when we were looking at themes not too long ago. So there's a fan base that really enjoys her and likes her for different reasons. And we just need to kind of see more of that to build on that kind of.
Yeah, and she has potential, like Michelle McCool, where she has that sassy attitude where she could be a top heel in the women's division, so that obviously helps a lot. Next up, we have Jada Parker. Now, for her floor, we give her Tegan Nox and the peak of Naomi. Now, Naomi, I can see Jada Parker being a fan favorite by many because she has she has like a lot of charisma, I'd say, and she's able to show that off with a lot of sassiness. I would like to see her play a babyface role to kind of see how much she can do with both sides. But yeah, Naomi is just a fan favorite by many, a very talented wrestler, and has seen a lot of success on the main roster.
Yeah, a former world champion, obviously a fan favorite for a lot of different reasons, went outside of WWE and had a lot of success as well. Yeah, I kind of see her in that same light. Could definitely see her going to the main roster, winning the world title, or on the the lower end, could potentially see her going to the roster and being in a world title picture, but just not winning it.
Yeah. Next up, we have Javon Evans. Now, I'll explain this one because I am the person who kind of picked his peak here, but we gave him the floor of Shelton Benjamin and the peak of Will Ospreay. Now, Will Ospreay might sound crazy to a lot of people because of Javon being so young. However, I think he is so talented to hit the heights of Will Ospreay. He has a similar moveset and similar style, and I think he has the potential to be a big name. NXT's already kind of, in just a few months, he's kind of already getting world title shots. So I think that kind of says a lot. And Shelton Benjamin is a super talented guy who unfortunately just never got the success. Was a prominent guy in the mid-card divisions, but yeah, this was kind of unfortunate with people around him and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Shelton Benjamin has won tag team titles, intercontinental titles, and whatnot. And I can definitely see Javon Evans playing that same role. He's definitely somebody who, like you say, he's kind of so young that he could pretty much go anywhere. And that's kind of why his peak is so high, because the way he's so talented in the ring at such a young age. There's a lot of room for growth and development. His promos are already pretty good. He has like this outgoing kind of attitude where he's like not cocky, but just like
he backs up his talk.
Yeah. And yeah, Javon Evans is really good. Obviously, everyone loves Javon Evans, and yeah, hopefully we see a lot more from him.
Yep. Next up, Josh Briggs. Now, for Josh Briggs, we gave him the floor of Keith Lee and the peak of Sheamus. Now, for the peak of Sheamus, that was given because I could see him being a hard-hitting type of guy who might potentially win a world heavyweight champion and might, you know, be a multi-time champion on the main roster. And yeah, just he's gonna be a consistent guy pretty much throughout his entire career, and he's kind of showing that right now in NXT.
Yeah. Another comparison could even be like a Kevin Owens or something like that, potentially, just based off his kind of skill set and the way he sells moves and whatnot. But yeah, really like Josh Briggs, and yeah, I hope he has a lot of success whenever he does eventually move on to the main roster.
Yep. Next up, then Women's North American Champion Kalani Jordan, and her peak we have as Io Sky in the floor of Thunder Rosa. So somebody who has a pretty high floor and a pretty high ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, she is one of the best wrestlers in NXT. Probably second, in my opinion, under Roxanne Perez, which we'll get to a little bit later on the list. But yeah, really high peak, even a good floor. I think no matter what, she'll be a world champion, whether that be in NXT or in WWE. But yeah, potential rumors on Stephanie Vaquer coming and facing her soon. So yeah, we'll like to see that for sure.
Yep. Next up, we have Lash Legend. Now, we gave her the floor of Raquel Rodriguez and the peak of Nia Jax. Now, for this, I think she can just play the big woman very well. She's doing that somewhat right now in NXT. And yeah, I think she can just be that sassy, cocky woman in the roster who, you know, consistently heel, might turn babyface at one point. She is right now. She's doing that fairly well. But yeah, I think she has a lot of potential. So yeah.
Yeah, not huge on Lash Legend. She's not my favorite for sure. I would definitely like to see her just get a lot more reps in NXT. It's not that she's bad or anything, but just like to see her get a lot more reps on the mic in particular, get better there, get better in ring and whatnot. But yeah, definitely somebody who I could see getting higher up on my like peak list or whatever. But as of right now, I'm just not a huge fan.
Yeah. Next up, we have Alexis King. Now, for his floor, we have it as Zack Ryder, not Matt Cardona, so don't get that confused, but the peak of Austin Theory. And why we do that?
That's just kind of the role he plays. Just a guy who, well, can win a lot of matches, but just not win the big ones, if that makes sense. Like, he'll win a lot of matches leading into a pay-per-view. He'll get that title match, but just not win it. He'll be involved in main storylines and whatnot, but just be on the bottom side of it, unfortunately. But yeah.
Yeah, another reason for Austin Theory as well is it might take a character change from a heel to a face as well. That's kind of like how Austin Theory is right now, where we're starting to see more of that babyface side, and he's kind of more likable as that. And it might be the same for Alexis King. But next up, we have Lola Vice. Now, for her floor, we have it as Zoe Stark in the peak of Shayna Baszler. For Shayna Baszler, I could see her just being that more dominant, kind of real fire style in NXT. She gets to the main roster. I could see her winning the world champion once or twice. But as of right now, kind of doesn't look like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, at least for me in particular, I don't really care for pretty much any of the like MMA style people that come in. I don't really care for their matches too much. I don't really like when like punches or like kicks or finishing moves or anything like that, and submissions obviously not very fun either. I don't really care for that style of wrestling too much. But Lola Vice does seem like better than your average like cage fighter who came to WWE. So I could see her getting a lot better and improving in all those areas I just named, basically.
Yeah. Next up, the big man with the North American champion, and that is Obafemi. Now, for his floor, we have it as Braun Strowman in the peak of Brock Lesnar. Now, for this, I mean, it's kind of obvious. He's a big guy who can move a lot of other big guys with ease. And yeah, it could just be that big, dominant, almost like attraction type of wrestler that we've seen. And the comparison to Braun Strowman, I could see him winning the world champion and maybe, unfortunately, falling down the card potentially, maybe due to injuries or just, with age or something like that. Just obviously bigger guys don't last as long. But yeah.
There's a lot of different things you could do with a character of Obafemi when he's so big and strong and could kind of do everything you want him to do. That he needs to do as far as like strength goes and whatnot. He's getting better and better in ring as far as being just more like agile and whatnot, like getting faster on the ropes and kind of just adding more moves to his skill set. And yeah, obviously Brock Lesnar is a very high peak. He is a multiple time champion. And yeah, so a very high peak. But for him, I feel like that is a fair comparison. With the what he's shown us in NXT. He's just been so good, so dominant as a North American champion, and I mean likely will end up being the longest reigning North American champion of all time.
Yep. Next up, one of your favorites, and that is Roxanne Perez. Now we give her the floor of Alexa Bliss and the peak of Mercedes Moné. So again, another person with high floor, high ceiling. And yeah, I'll let you kind of talk about it.
Yeah, obviously Roxanne Perez is one of my favorite women in all of wrestling. Not even just women, just in wrestling in general. She is just one of my favorites. I've been behind her for a really long time now. Since I basically came back, she was kind of one of the early ones I picked and got behind and watched all her matches. So yeah, I'm very excited for her future as far as going to the main roster. I think she has a lot of potential there. I think she should be on the main roster come next Mania. Will she have a Mania match? I don't know just yet. Obviously, that'll be a little early. That'll be sort of like a Jade situation all over again, kind of. But I do see her being on the main roster by next year. I do see her being a multiple-time world champion. I do think she is one of the best in-ring and out of the ring on the mic. She does everything really well, really good, and yeah, that's why her peak is so high.
Next up, we have Shawn Spears. Now, a bit of an older guy, but we gave him the floor of where he is right now. I think this is kind of the worst we'll see of Shawn Spears. We gave him the peak of John Morrison. Now, for the John Morrison one, that kind of just is, he could just be a consistent, similar to Shelton Benjamin was, a consistent mid-card type of guy where he'll just kind of flounder around there, unfortunately. Could see potential world title shots, but maybe not win them. But yeah, he's kind of an older, so it's kind of hard to rank him. But yeah, it's kind of where we see him right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Next up, Sol Ruca. Now, we give her the floor of Dakota Kai and the peak of Natalya. Now, obviously, Natalya may not be known as the best wrestler, whereas Sol Ruca is kind of this more innovative offense, but I could see Sol Ruca being a more of a kind of initiator in the women's division where she could kind of change things down the line. Obviously, she's still so young, so it's kind of hard to say that. But she could be somebody who's respected like Natalya. That's kind of why we gave that comparison.
Yeah, she's one of the few women high flyers, I guess you could call her in a way. And there's not very many women. There's a lot of athletic and agile, and they're very acrobatic and whatnot, but not necessarily high flyers. Like a Tiffany Stratton, yes, she does great moonsaults, but she's not a high flyer. I would almost call her a technician more than a high flyer or something. But she is, like I said, one of the very few women that is a high flyer. She does a lot of athletic moves. Her soul snatcher is one of the best finishing moves in all of wrestling. Looks the best, comes across great on TV, and yeah, I think she'll have a really good run once she eventually kind of harnesses all her talent into one and gets her character all the way there.
Yeah, and similar, after that match with Kalani, it was such like almost like resembling like the Ricochet Ospreay match, where it's so like crazy offense between them. We haven't seen that with like two women really. So yeah, that was kind of a big thing as well. So really hope she does live up to the heights we want her to be at. Next up is Tatum Paxley. Now, for her peak, or her floor rather, we have it as Lacey Evans in the peak of Shotzi. Now, for that, we could just see her being around the mid-card pretty much for her entire career. She could be a fan favorite like Shotzi is kind of starting to be, or where she was starting to be before she took more time out. But yeah, I don't see too much from her as of right now. Obviously, this can change within a year's time, but as of right now, that's just how it is.
Yeah, not very much behind her character right now. She is really good in ring, and she is one of the people who WWE kind of sent out to TNA to have a match with Jordynne Grace in her open challenge. So they do have like a lot of trust in her to go into another company and not kind of let everyone down as far as showing off that WWE is a prominent, wrestling company, obviously. But yeah, I would like to see more of her in another gimmick. Because I don't really like this whole like obsessed over all the titles and every title she sees she's obsessed with. Don't really much care for all that, but she is pretty good in ring. Would like to see more of her. So yeah.
Next up, we have the Don, Tony D'Angelo. Now, we give him the floor of Jack Swagger in the peak of Rusev. Now, for the peak of Rusev, that's kind of just, he could just be a super fan favorite and get super over, but unfortunately might not get a big one, but could be consistent mid-card type of guy. And Jack Swagger, similar, just he could be somebody who could win a few world champions and, might just, again, flounder on that mid-card.
Yeah, Tony D'Angelo, just another person who unfortunately I'm just not very much behind. I don't really care for the gimmick too much. The whole family in general don't really care for a whole lot. I don't really think he's amazing in ring. I know a lot of people may disagree with that. But yeah, just my opinion. But yeah, not a big fan of Tony D'Angelo.
Yeah, fair enough. Next up, we have the former NXT World Champion, and that is Trick Williams. We give him the floor of Ricky Starks in the peak of Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Trick Williams just has whatever it is. The crowd just reacts to him when he comes out. He's good in ring and he's getting better. His promos are fully there. I really like his promo game. That's probably his strongest part of his character. But yeah, I really like Trick Williams. He's improving every time we see him. He's already a NXT World Champion. And maybe he won't be on the main roster this coming year in 2025, but in 2026 he will definitely be a part of the roster.
Yeah. And last but not least, we have Wes Lee. Now, we gave him the floor of Cedric Alexander in the peak of Kofi Kingston. Now, for this one, we gave him Cedric Alexander as the floor because, again, he's super talented, but was kind of wasted in other stuff and was just never given the right spotlight, really. And Kofi Kingston, I could see Wes Lee getting a big moment like a Kofi Mania potentially. I could see him be like a crowd favorite like Kofi is as well. But yeah, I just really love Wes Lee. He's one of the best right now. And yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame what happened to him whenever it seemed like he was about to be called up to the main roster. And then he got injured, and that seems like it kind of set him back and it put him back in NXT. But it did sort of help him in a way as well, because now he's back with the Rascals. A lot of people are really excited about that, including myself. I didn't get a chance to see them, when they were all together originally, so having come back and seeing them live again is pretty cool. But yeah, Wes Lee, one of the better ones. Definitely would like to see him become a North American champion again at some point, maybe. Intercontinental champion, US champion, even a world title at some point would be really cool. But yeah, Wes Lee, really good. And I mean, that's our list. That is all 25 NXT people that we're ranking. Obviously, there's a ton more people that we can rank. If y'all would like to see us finish the roster, y'all can like the video, let us know in the comments, and we'll come around to that for sure. But yeah, these are the 25 most seen people on NXT, I guess you could say. So if you like our picks or if you dislike our picks, let us know. If you'd like to change something, also comment that down below. And yeah, we'll catch you guys in the next one.